Don't mind the dog. As a small-town, misfit millennial living in Minnesota, I was beyond excited when I got accepted to the University of Wisconsin. This meant a new town with new, hopefully like-minded, people. Well, honestly, I was more excited to move when my best friend Zachary was going to be moving with me. Recently, his mother's health had taken a turn for the worse, and he just didn't think it was a good idea to move at this point in his life. I totally understood, and while it was definitely a bummer about his mom, this also meant I would be moving alone. I'm 27 years old, so the thought of a dorm life is just not appealing to me whatsoever. As soon as I knew my best friend was not going to be moving with me, I started to look on Craigslist for apartments in my price range. The semester was starting in about 6 weeks, so this change of plans definitely brought on some anxiety. I jotted down a few addresses and phone numbers, and as I continued scrolling through the listings, I came upon one that was only $200 per month. There weren't any pictures, but it stated that I would have my own bedroom and bathroom, and my only roommates would be an elderly woman and her well-behaved dog. Could this be any more perfect? That weekend, I took a small road trip to the town I'd be moving to, which was about a 3-hour drive away. I had called the number for 4 of the listings I'd found, and I'd had appointments to look at them over the course of that Saturday. The first on my list was a cheap place living with the old lady. Honestly, this was the only one that interested me, as the other living arrangements involved sharing space with fresh out of the high schoolers, and I am just not one for noise. Finding the 2-story house was easy enough, and when I pulled up, parked, and headed towards the front door, I was greeted by a very sweet old woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Glynis. She ushered me inside and started giving me a tour of the house. Antique furniture in every room, beautiful ornamental wallpaper, and hardwood floors. I couldn't believe $200 was all she wanted a month to be allowed to stay in such a lovely home. We climbed the staircase, slowly as she was really quite old, and once we were up, she walked over to the first door on the right and opened it to reveal a very cheerful, sunny room. It had large windows that overlooked the street outside, and as advertised, it had a bathroom attached that I would not have to share. We made our way downstairs and sat in the kitchen where she made some tea and offered me some homemade muffins. Mrs. Glynis asked me about my major, my hobbies, and about my family. I also told her about my best friend and his ailing mother. She offered her condolences before telling me that she actually had a son that passed away a few years prior, and that ever since, she had been all alone. That tugged on my heartstrings, just a bit. After maybe an hour or so of getting to know each other, Mrs. Glynis asked me what I thought of the room, the home, and herself. Even though I had 3 other scheduled visits that day, I knew I had found the perfect place. I told her I thought she was wonderful, and that this would be a great environment for me to live in while going to school. No lease was involved, as Mrs. Glynis said she didn't think legal mumbo-jumbo was necessary, and she didn't ask for a deposit either, as she said I seemed like a very respectful, young adult. I left her house feeling relieved that I had found a place to stay so quickly. While driving back to my hometown, an odd thought struck me. The ad for the home mentioned a dog, but the whole time I was there I didn't see one at all. Or any signs of one, actually. I brushed it off as a possible senile quirk, though nothing else about the woman that day made me think she was anything less than sane. I returned 3 weeks later to move in. Zachary accompanied me with his truck and helped me move my bed, dresser, TV, and all my boxes of stuff inside. He met Mrs. Glynis, and while she was certainly no Zachary, he thought she was a cute old lady and wished me luck settling in. I gave him a hug and thanked him for helping me move. After he drove off, I decided to get to unpacking. After unpacking the necessities and making my room as comfortable as it was going to get for my first night, I went downstairs for a glass of water. Mrs. Glynis was sitting at the table playing solitaire on her computer. She was wearing a quilted robe and had her hair in foam curlers. When she noticed me enter the room, she squinted down at the corner of her computer screen, noticed the time, and said she ought to be getting to bed. I looked up at a clock on the wall and noticed it was already after 11 p.m. I didn't realize I had been unpacking for so long. She closed her laptop, put a few things away in some cupboards, then wished me a good first night. Before leaving the kitchen, she looked right at me and said, "Oh, and dear, don't mind the dog. He'll get used to you very soon." She then walked to her bedroom, which was on the first floor, turned the light on, and shut the door behind herself. Right, the dog. It's not that I mind dogs, I love pets, really. I just hadn't seen a dog once so far, or dog toys or food or any water dishes. If this was the only crazy thing about this old lady, her having an imaginary pet, I could deal with that. I got my glass of water, ascended the stairs, and got ready for bed. Found my laptop and started to message Zachary online. I asked if he made it back okay. He asked how the unpacking was going. Fairly basic, boring conversation. It wasn't long before he had to go to bed as he worked in the morning, and I decided it was a good time for me to go to sleep too. But just as I was starting to drift off, my eyes shot open. Something had started to scratch at my bedroom door. I stared through the darkness at the sound. The scratching soon was accompanied by whining, which prompted me to get out of bed. As weird as this was, Mrs. Glynis didn't need to be kept up because I refused to pet the dog and set it at ease. I flipped on my bedroom light, opened the door, and nothing. There was no dog there. I peeked down the hallway, then down the stairs. Nothing. I sighed, then shut the door to my room. After shutting the lights off and climbing back into bed, I fell asleep without fail. The sun woke me up, and after using the toilet, I headed downstairs. Mrs. Glynis was making coffee, and like myself, was still in pajamas. I wished her a good morning, but couldn't help bringing up the dog. I met your dog last night. Well, sort of. It was scratching at my door, and I was going to pet it and let it sniff me, but when I opened the door, it wasn't there. Mrs. Glynis looked as though she was trying to word her next sentence very carefully, probably for fear of sounding crazy. I'm afraid you won't actually be seeing the dog, dear. He's invisible. Invisible? You've got to be kidding me. Yes, dear, but he really is a sweet boy. I don't believe he'll be bothering you again. She smiled at me, then opened a cupboard and brought out 2 mugs. Would you like some coffee, dear? I could tell she was not wanting to speak of the matter any longer, so I accepted the coffee, drank it in my room while getting dressed for the day, then went out to explore the town in an attempt to put the dog nonsense behind me. Campus wasn't any more than a 10-minute walk, and I spent most of the day exploring the different buildings and seeing where my classes would be located. It was just a few more weeks before the semester started, and I wanted to be as prepared as I could be. After exploring campus, I decided to just walk around before heading back home to get a feel for the town. Zachary called me, and we talked for over 2 hours about this new video game he was playing. My phone started to beep its low battery warning to me, so I told him I had to go. It was dark and I was lost, but it wasn't long before I came across campus grounds again, which meant I wasn't far at all from home. I reached the front steps and noticed no lights were on inside. Mrs. Glynis must have already gone to sleep. I opened the front door and immediately tripped over something in the dark. I fell forward and tried grabbing the nearest thing to me, a coat rack, but it wasn't enough to keep me from falling. I stood back up, found the nearest light switch, and flicked on the lights. I picked up the coat rack and placed Mrs. Glynis' sweater back on it before scanning the room for what I tripped over. There was nothing at all near the door that I could have tripped over. The dog entered my mind, and I began to feel just a bit uneasy. I went to the kitchen and saw Mrs. Glynis had left a plate of cookies on the counter for me. Even if she was crazy, she really was a sweet old woman. I took a cookie, poured myself a glass of milk, then went upstairs to my room. I opened my laptop in an attempt to see what Zachary was up to. Or rather, to see how his game was going. But my computer wasn't connecting to the internet. I decided I would go tinker with the router, but first I would charge my phone. I hadn't unpacked all my things yet, and my phone charger was one of those things I hadn't unpacked, so I started to look for it. I opened a box, and after looking through its contents for a couple of minutes, I heard it again. No, there was no such thing as invisible dogs. But there was definitely something in this house, something at my door that was very real that I could not see. The scratching persisted. Then the whining started. The dog was real, and I was going to prove it too, if nobody else, to myself. Besides, Mrs. Glynis didn't seem afraid of it, so why should I? I decided that if I could somehow see the dog, I wouldn't be so afraid. And how do you make something invisible? Well, visible. You put something over it, I guess. I scanned my room as the scratching and the whining continued. I looked at my bed, walked over to it, then took the flat sheet out from under the covers. My plan was to open the door and throw the sheet over the dog, enabling me to see its outline. My heart started to race. I clutched the end of the sheet with one hand as I held the doorknob in the other. In a fast, swift motion, I swung the door open, grabbed the sheet with both hands, then threw it into the hallway ahead of me. As the sheet draped over the animal, exposing its curvature and proving to me that something did in fact exist, just in front of me, I became horrified. It wasn't the shape of a dog exposed under the sheet. It was the shape of a human, down on all fours, with its head staring straight up at me.